Arirang Special.
There was censorship at the time. Newspapers couldn't really report everything at the time. There was a sense that they were looking at our reports, they were very concerned about what we were saying. Some people believed that people were following them. It's assumed that they were bugging the telephone.
It's been very difficult for media in South Korea to behave freely, and there are those strings between government and media in South Korea.
They did fail during the Sewol crisis when they didn't check the information, they trust too much what the government was saying, and they announced that everybody was safe when they were not.
The South Korean media does have a responsibility to respond to the public's reaction and sentiment that we saw in the Candlelight movement.
My name is Donald Kirk, or Don Kirk. I've been in and out of Korea since 1972. I first came to Korea on assignment from the Chicago Tribune. I first arrived at Kimpo Airport from Haneda Airport. There was no Incheon International Airport. And the reason was the Red Cross talks, the North-South Red Cross talks, where they were discussing many of the same issues we hear about today: separated families, opening of commerce, negotiations, dialogue. They had small taxis, but there were no traffic jams of the sorts that you see now. So life was considerably simpler, actually, in 1972 when I arrived for the North-South Red Cross talks from Japan. Well, you can trace the democracy movement long before I got here. There was the student revolution of 1960 that resulted in the demise of Lee Seung-man. He fled to Hawaii, and a brief period of democratic rule then, which ended with the takeover of the government by Park Chung-hee on May 16, 1961. I wasn't here then, but the democracy movement obviously goes deep into modern Korean history. I did get here in 1972 when the democracy movement was really getting quite strong with all the support for Kim Dae-jung. He'd already run for president. In that period, I interviewed Kim Dae-jung. I didn't have to get his address or anything. I simply asked the taxi driver in front to take me to Kim Dae-jung's residence. He knew exactly where it was in Mapo-gu. And DJ was glad in those days to talk to foreign journalists. He had time. I think that, for one thing, foreign journalists were quite sympathetic with Kim Dae-jung and with the protest movement against Park Chung-hee, who was then the president. They regarded him as certainly not interested in promoting democracy. They regarded Korea as almost a dictatorship. And so they were really almost on the side of the foes of the government. I've witnessed a series of mass demonstrations against the government. So the Candlelight Revolution was really a continuation of the impulse toward democratic reform that I first saw here after coming here in 1972.
So this was the fall of 2016, and it actually started in the late summer, if I recall, on the campus of Ewha University, which is a well-known women's university here in South Korea. They were actually protesting what they considered nepotism by the president of the university. Later it turned out that this was all wrapped up with President Park Geun-hye, the president of the country. There was more and more evidence of government overreach, like a blacklist of people in culture and literature. There was also reports about some members of the media or owners of newspapers that were getting called in for questioning or getting in trouble or asked to be removed. And so there was all this percolating, and what really brought it together was the leak of this tablet PC that was said to have been Chasen Shields, who was a central figure in the ultimate removal of Park Geun-hye.
피청구인 대통령 박근혜를 파면한다.
I think it was more difficult to work as a journalist during the Park Geun-hye administration. There is some cases of journalists and media who were tried, for example, for defamation because of the article, because of what they wrote. There is this case of this Japanese journalist who was not allowed to leave Korea because of what he wrote about Park Geun-hye, and that created an atmosphere of self-censorship that was extremely toxic and really bad.
Both domestic media and international media were not given access to her or to her ministers in the way that we've seen under the Moon administration. And I don't know how many press conferences she had, but there were very few, and it's very difficult to get information. It's very difficult in South Korea to get people to speak on the record, to speak using their name, and it's also difficult to get public records.
They did fail during the Sewol crisis when they didn't check the information, they trust too much what the government was saying, and they announced that everybody was safe when they were not. We should not forget that during the Candlelight Revolution, some media revelation and some scoop from some outlets are the thing that started the whole process, the whole movement. I think we have to be fair. South Korean media sometimes failed, but as well they did some very useful things.
The Candlelight movement was a very dramatic period. It went on and on. They had hundreds of thousands of people out there that sometimes they claimed 2 million in Central Seoul, but maybe they had 500,000 on a typical Saturday. I believe the demonstrations reached their peak on the weekends. And it was a tremendous movement, very exciting to cover, very interesting. I went there many times. So I think I went there just about every Saturday for weeks.
It was a really terrible experience because, same as other Korean reporters, all the holiday, day off, weekend day off were gone. Every Saturday there was a demonstration, and we went to government area every weekend to cover. But also, it was a very exciting experience because, we reporter loves to see the historical moment.
One of the things that stood out about the demonstrations was the civility of the crowds. You didn't see bottles getting thrown and rocks getting thrown and Molotov cocktails getting thrown and people getting arrested widely by the government. And I thought that really stood out as demonstrating what a sort of peaceful democratic movement could be like.
In the past, in Korea, you could see sometimes some fight with the police. And what was really, really amazing during the Candlelight demonstration was that you could see families with babies, with kids, young people sticking like flower stickers to the police buses. So it was extremely peaceful and comfortable to be there.
So I've been a journalist for 15 years and have covered plenty of rallies and demonstrations and protests. South Korea's were the biggest I had ever witnessed. It's really astounding the amount of people that crowded into that main Dragon Seoul. And unless you've really been to Seoul, you can't understand the size and the scope of that giant thoroughfare that cuts right to the palace. But that was completely filled up, and it was Saturday after Saturday after Saturday for several weekends in a row. And it was really moving to watch. These protests never really got violent either. These were largely peaceful, and there was kind of a festival atmosphere to it. There were performers, there were kind of cheerleaders to try and rev up the crowd. There was that kind of music festival atmosphere after these had been going for several weeks.
The Candlelight Protests obviously reflected a great deal of frustration on the part of millions of people with the conservative government, and also with the whiff of corruption, with the scent of corruption.
It was not only about the former President Park Geun-hye. I think it was about many things that she represented at the time and things from the past that Koreans don't want anymore, like corruptions, like how you can sometimes help your friends or help the daughter of your friends to enter university. There is not a single reason why people were demonstrating, and anyway, that was my interpretation of things. In France, many people say, oh, it's like the May 68 of the Korean youth. You know that May 68 in France was a big event. Many students, many workers demonstrated, and it was a huge event. I'm not too sure if we can compare the two, but what I can say that in both cases, I see it as a rejection of an old society and trying to bring a new one.
그런 시위 규모라든지 또 상대적으로 아주 평화롭게 진행되었고 세계적으로도 민주화의 어떤 그런 열망 같은 것을 잘 보여줬던 것이라고 생각합니다. 그런 것이 뭐 어느 순간에 이루어진 것은 아니고요. 어찌 보면 3.1 운동부터 그리고 80년대 민주화 운동, 87년에 6월 항쟁 등이 다 밑거름이 되었기 때문에 가능했던 것이 아닌가 생각합니다.
1910년 대한제국의 주권이 일제에게 넘어갔습니다. 인민은 주권이 없었습니다. 네, 1919년 만세 시위가 벌어지고 그 3.1운동의 과정이자 결과로 같은 해 4월 11일 상하이에서 대한민국 임시정부가 출범하는데요. 엘버트 테일러라는 당시 통신사의 특파원이 그 3.1운동을 세계에 알리는 데 큰 역할을 했습니다. 1919년 3월 1일 만세 시위가 시작됐을 때 엘버트 테일러는 가족과 함께 당시 한국에 살고 있었는데 만세 시위가 일어났다는 소식을 듣고 그 독립선언서를 미국으로 보냅니다. 그래서 이제 미국 신문에 보도가 되고 운동이 당시 한반도에서 어떤 의미를 갖고 있는지를 널리 알린 거죠. 그러면서 전 세계 양심 있는 사람들의 공감을 얻어내는데 성공을 했습니다. 요즘 말로 하면 3.1운동이 세계화된 거죠. 3.1운동의 결과 중국에서는 5.4운동이 벌어지고 아시아의 약소민족 해방운동이 활발하게 벌어지는데 거기에 3.1운동이 중요한 역할을 했고 또 그렇게 하는데 당시 한국에 거주하고 있던 외국인들이 큰 역할을 했습니다.
Certainly the March 1st, 1919 was a revolution against Japanese colonialism and Japanese oppression. It was reflected the desire for freedom, not only freedom of speech, but just freedom for self-rule of the Korean people. And the protests against Park Chung-hee rule and the Gwangju revolt are all part of a desire among Koreans for freedom of expression.
These candlelight protests get a lot of attention for being this democratic movement, right? A real show of South Korea's democracy maturing. But we also have to remember that it was protests and students that really brought about the democracy in South Korea in the first place in the late 1980s.
Listen, all foreigners in Gwangju. Listen, all foreigners in Gwangju. Army performed military operations to clear the rioters in the city. Please keep inside the building and don't come out.
So Gwangju was a very significant incident. It was very compelling. And of course, you have to put that in the context of the whole democracy movement. So I went to the governor's building where the people who were leading the uprising had established a headquarters. And they talked about it. In fact, they had a press card which they gave me. And they talked about what they were looking for and what they were doing and so forth. They were very impassioned. And then afterward, what was extremely saddening was that those people had disappeared, either killed or arrested. And there were coffins lying outside the provincial headquarters. Family members were looking in the coffins to see if they saw their loved ones there. So it was a very sad scene. It was such an isolated incident. In Seoul, there were demonstrations in Seoul in that period, incidentally, I remember that. But in Seoul, there wasn't an awareness of the depth of what was going on. foreign journalists too were considerably moved by what they saw in Gwangju.
They were really brave, and at least a few of them knew that they were going to die, but they struggled on, and you were very fortunate to have such a great, brave history behind you.
Telephone lines to Gwangju had been cut, and so we had to go to surrounding towns such as Jangsang or Naju, and we used the telephone there in the post office.
Go back and read my journal of comments.
You have to put Gwangju on the timeline of Korean progress toward democracy. I think over the years Gwangju has maintained its significance. There's a tremendous memorial in Gwangju. So I think it was a tremendous event in the rise of democracy in Korea. But you didn't see democracy rising right away. Chun Doo-hwan went through 7 years as president after Gwangju, beginning during that period. He was president for another 7 years before there were the protests, the huge demonstrations in Seoul in June of 1987.
This candlelight demonstration were a huge signal showing how vibrant, how lively Korean democracy is. And I think that for the current government, I mean, that was elected after this demonstration, I think that this candlelight must be a reminder that they have to do policies for the people first, and they should not repeat the mistake from the past.
I thought that was really powerful because what it demonstrates is ultimately the democracy maturing, reasserting itself, and then South Korean people demanding more and better governance. So the issues before were, we want to change the system, and that system got changed and got established. But now South Koreans are saying, these are the things that aren't okay with us. Our government needs to be far more accountable than it previously was. And so that's a sense of growing up in a way that's really important for people to go through.
Now, the question is, how much change is it really bringing about in Korean society?
Stay on it. Keep their eye on the ball. Keep their eye on these institutions that are responsible for the level of democracy and development that takes place in South Korean society. Those ideas are linked: transparency, democracy, and development. If you allow the kind of corruption that existed during the Park Geun-hye administration to continue, you're not going to have the level of democracy and development that you would like.
So ordinary citizens who participated in the Candlelight Revolution are going to have to keep up the pressure, both on their elected officials and on their employers and everyone that they interact with in society here. And also demand more from the media, demand better stories, more thought-provoking stories, more probing stories. And they're going to have to obviously keep consuming that media so that it can be funded.
As a journalist, I'm an observer. So journalists luckily don't have to have solutions. We can observe and analyze, but we don't have to solve the problems. But I still think the young journalists should be looking for ways to get their articles out, get their views out, report as honestly and accurately as they can, not get swept up in one faction or one viewpoint or another, but just stick to what they believe in and what they should do. Keep reporting accurately and honestly and fully as they possibly can, and keep on trying to get their stories out there.